54, Table A, they'll only use 3% because they got their 30, and then they become pension eligible, and Mod 75 doesn't matter anymore. But if they don't have their 30 and they're not Mod 75, they're going to have that table be
2 haircuts.
Yes. So another thing that is very important for us to mention, and we mention this in our pension seminars, something that very few employees understand how it works, but most of them have heard it. They call it the CAM $400 rule. So what this $400 rule is basically a way that the company doesn't have to give them their entire lump sum when they leave the company. So they give them a partial lump sum. And the way that they do that is by measuring the difference of the annuity payments that are applicable to them. So it's important to understand that every pension plan that an employee is eligible for, the company's going to take the highest benefit and give them that pension when they leave. So one way that the company avoids giving them the entire lump sum of the highest pension is through this $400 rule, and you'll see how it works in a second. So the difference between the highest 2 annuity payments is less than $400. So let's say the CAM equates to $2,000 a month, and the cash balance equates to $1,700 a month. That's less than $400 difference. So they are going to be able to take their lump sum, the full lump sum, or the full annuity payment, whichever they choose. Unfortunately, if it is greater than $400, they are only going to receive a partial lump sum, which is actually the second highest benefiting lump sum. And then they're going to get a monthly check of the residual, or the difference between the 2 annuity payments. And so I think the easiest way to actually understand how this works is by looking at this table. So in this example, the highest 2 annuity payments are the ATB and the CAM. As you can see, the difference between these 2 annuity payments is greater than $400. It's actually $900. So what that means is they no longer get to take that CAM lump sum, which is the largest. They're going to have to take, if they want to take the lump sum, they're going to have to take the second highest lump sum, which is the ATB, or $300,000 up front. And then the company is going to give them a residual annuity of $900, which is the difference between the 2 highest annuities. They can, of course, still take that highest annuity payment, or the $3,900 a month. So it's a way that the company sort of incentivizes them to take the annuity payment and makes the lump sum a less attractive option. And all the companies are looking for ways to make that lump sum less attractive, as we'll see when we talk about the Pension Protection Act in a second. Just because it's less of an upfront liability or burden for the company to pay that lump sum, and they'd rather annuitize that over time.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
How often does this $400 rule in general come into play?
More often than not. I would say probably 75% of the time. And like we talked about earlier, it's usually the CAM that's the most, or the highest benefiting pension. It's not until the employees get older, once they get into their mid to late 60s or even early 60s, usually about age 63, that cash balance will kick in. And the reason for that is because the lump sum started to decrease once they get older because of their life expectancy.
Right.
Cash balance does not. That is always growing because of interest and salary credit.
Now, I was confused when you were explaining the difference. I was thinking that you would be forced to take the ATB at $3,000, but then you were able to. You pointed to the $3,900 as being available. I'm not sure why.
They can take either the $3,900 or the $300,000 up front and $900 a month. So it's like a partial annuity, partial lump sum situation, or a full annuity. Those are the 2 options under this scenario.
So there is opportunity to take a partial.
Yeah, partial lump sum and that's actually what they call it, is a partial lump sum on their benefits site. And then they call the difference, or the monthly check that they get if they take the partial lump sum, they call that the residual annuity, which in this case is $900 a month.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's quite complex. Okay.
Yeah, and very few of them understand in this. That's why it's very important for us to know, because this is where we can really differentiate by helping explain this to them. A lot of them feel sort of robbed when they see the partial lump sum. Why don't I get a full lump sum? What's the math behind this? And here it is right here.
Right.
So it's sort of a loophole that the company found, because they have to give them the largest pension benefit. Here's a way that they can give them only part of the largest pension benefit. Probably the most.
Tyson, one other question before you go to that next slide. Back on the one before where you were talking about the $400 rule and how that works and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
A question came up, I think, at the last pension thing in January that was here in San Antonio.
Seminar?
And, yeah, the seminar. And some people seem to think that there's a cash balance that some of these people seem to think that they get in addition to this. So when the cash balance plan was frozen, is that another distribution?
First of all, the cash balance plan was never frozen. Well, I mean, unless you consider them freezing the salary credits, which they did do, and there's not a slide in here, I don't think, but they did that in 2005. They discontinued the salary credits on the cash balance, so now it only grows by interest credits. Second of all, they have to choose, or they don't have to choose, but they're going to get the higher of the two. They don't get both. So they don't get a cash balance, unless they were talking about their 401k as a cash balance, because that's sort of like a cash balance since it's a defined contribution plan. Does that make sense?
Sort of. Well, the thing is, here they're going to get. They have the option of getting the highest one here. If there's more than $400 difference between the two, then they're going to get the second highest, plus they get the residual annuity.
Yeah, so they do get a partial lump sum, which in many cases is the cash balance. In this one, that's not the case, but usually this cash balance is the second best one. So then, yeah, in that case, they'll get the cash balance, and then they'll get a residual CAM annuity.
Okay.
So I guess they can look at it like that, but they're not going to get two lump sums.
Okay.
Okay. So moving right along, this is probably the most important relationship when we're explaining the pension plan, how it works, that we explain is the relationship of interest rates and the lump sum. So, of course, they have a negative correlation, meaning that a low interest rate market means a high lump sum market. If interest rates go up, the lump sum is going to go down, and usually at a ratio of 1% to 10%, or every 1% increase in the lump sum, we're going to see, 1% increase in the interest rate, we're going to see roughly a 10% decrease to the lump sum. And that's going to depend on their age. If they're very young, their lump sum is going to have even more variability based on the interest rates, so maybe in the range of 12% for every 1%. If they're older, it might only be about 8% for every 1% increase in the interest rate. But a very significant reduction if we see interest rates usually spiking up pretty quickly after the end of a low interest rate environment. So if we see interest rates go up 2% in roughly 18 months, which has been known to happen after low interest rate markets, that's anywhere from 20 to 24% reduction to the pension. So it's very important that they understand this relationship and that they keep up on interest rates, and that's what we help them do through our seminars, our conference calls, and our consultations. So one thing that's also very important that we mention is how the PPA impacts the pension, because this was the legislation that was signed in 2006 that basically allowed the corporations to change the way that they discount pension calculations to get to a lump sum. And the reason for that being is that many of the companies that have these lump sum options had underfunded pensions or insolvent pensions and could not afford too much upfront liability based on these lump sum payouts. So what they did was allow them to change, and they've always used the GAT rate to calculate that lump sum. And for everybody that doesn't know the GAT rate, GAT stands for General Agreement on Tariff and Trade. All it is an index on the 30-year Treasury, and each company calculates their GAT rate a little bit differently. AT&T calculates it based on, for managers, the previous quarter's middle month average Treasury. So for instance, right now we are in quarter 1. So the manager's GAT rate for this quarter is going to be based on November's average Treasury. November is the middle month of last quarter. For non-managers, it's a little bit different. They actually use November of the previous year, and they use that rate all year long. So for non-managers right now, they're using the same GAT rate as the managers. They're both based on November, but at the end of the quarter, the manager's rate will change. Now, what the PPA did, now each company used the schedule differently, but it allowed them to slowly convert to using the corporate bond rate or a corporate bond yield curve. They call it the PPA rate, which is based on 3 different interest rates. And it's a very confusing calculation how they come to it. But essentially, it's roughly 1.5% to 2% higher